A story a day.
So let me take this back a little bit, and I did meet Kofi Annan quite a few times. I interviewed him in West Africa during the conflicts there. Interviewed him here in Kenya when he came during the post-election violence. So I knew him for many years. Let me take it back a little bit. 1994. This is the one thing he's criticized most about. And by the way, he became UN Secretary General from 1997 to 2006, right? So about 10 years, 1997 to 2006, if I'm not mistaken. You can correct that. So he was there for 10 years. So 1994, he was not the UN Secretary General, but he was in charge of peacekeeping for the UN. And the reason I'm saying this is because in Rwanda, on the 7th of April 1994, when the horrific genocide began, and most of you know the story, 10,000 people a day slaughtered for about 100 days, comes to about 1 million people in 100 days. Incredible. It was the most horrific acts of inhumanity in the 20th century. So there was a peacekeeping unit in Kigali at the time, led by a Canadian general. His name was Romeo Dallaire. He was in charge of peacekeeping, and they could see the signs that a genocide was coming, and a genocide, the country was about to tear itself apart. And they sent a cable to New York, directly to the UN headquarters in New York. They sent a fax, a telex, a cable. They sent all the information they could. And apparently what happened is the messages were ignored in New York. Completely ignored. That yes, there's a potential genocide. Yes, there's potential bloodshed coming. And this was ignored. And a lot of people, a lot of critics blamed Kofi Annan then as the head of peacekeeping for the UN. And this would follow him throughout his career. The Rwandans, for one, found it very difficult to forgive him for not reacting, not saying something, not responding to this cable, which may have averted the genocide of 1994. So imagine living with that all your life, well, most of your life, because for the next, from 94 till now, 24 years, almost a quarter century, he has had to live with this fact that had he made enough noise, had they called for more peacekeepers to be sent to Rwanda, maybe the genocide would have been averted. Maybe 1 million people would not have been killed in 100 days. So that's one thing. And again, there were other issues in Bosnia and in those parts of the world where there was so much conflict in the 90s. But again, Kofi Annan becomes UN Secretary General in 1997, and for 10 years he remained there. First sub-Saharan African to be elected UN Secretary General. Again, a huge burden on his shoulders. So when I was covering West Africa in those days of major conflict and upheaval, from Liberia to Sierra Leone to Guinea-Conakry, conflicts up and down the west coast of Africa, and the place, ironically, the place where all the rebel movements would meet would be Ghana, Kofi Annan's original country of origin. And he would come there as UN Secretary General, and he would meet the warring factions, and they would come to some kind of peace agreement, and then everyone would leave. And I met him a couple of times in Ghana during one of those conflicts, and we had an interview, we had to chat, and again, the question would always arise: could you have done more? Could you have, done something differently? And he always used to say, look, if I was the head of the United Nations, probably, but as head of peacekeeping, there's only so much one could have done, and you need many countries to come on board to support you on this. So again, that question kept arising and rising and rising. Fast forward, February or January 2008, Kenya is in civil strife. We're about to go plummeting down the abyss. It is going crazy, and we called just about every mediator possible, from Benjamin Mkapa to John Kufuor to Grassa, Michelle, you name it. You remember all those folks who came through here trying to mediate the warring factions and the madness that was going on across the country. And then in stepped UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. And a lot of people say it was his calmness, his diplomacy that kept PNU and ODM at bay. I mean, they were literally baying for his blood or trying to bully him. And he refused to be bullied. He refused to be cowed. And in the end, an accord was struck and a coalition government formed. And we literally looked over the edge of the cliff, didn't like what we liked, and we pulled back. But a lot of people say Kofi Annan had a lot to do with that. So, and I interviewed him 2012 actually. Now this is later. We've come back from the brink, coalition government. Referendum comes over in 2010. In 2012, Ocampo announces the 6 people who are going to The Hague. Kofi Annan comes through. He has an envelope in his hands and he takes it over to Ocampo actually in the end. But I interviewed him in 2012 here at the Serena Hotel. And again, the question kept arising. So what do we do now? You named 6 people going to The Hague. And how fair is this list? And I kept asking that question. How fair? What criteria did you use to narrow it down to these 6? And he spoke, and I tell you, we talked about it. And I asked him about the conflict. Kenya. How close were we to civil war in 2007, 2008? And he said, closer than many of us think. And one tiny little incident could have just taken us over the edge. And it made me think a lot about that. It made me really think, wow, how close we had come and how crazy it would have become, and where would we be now 10 years later? And 10 years later, we heard over the weekend, the man at 80 years old passed away peacefully in his sleep in his house. So it's up to, whatever you think, whatever you may think of what Kofi Annan represented, or what kind of a person he was, is up to you. History will judge the man at the end of the day. Every man and woman has their faults, and no one is perfect. And maybe he was trying to right the wrongs of the past. Maybe he felt that guilt of the Rwandan genocide of 1994 really ate at him. And he wanted to avert that in another African country. And when the situation arose here in Kenya, maybe that's what he did. And now he can live in peace because he helped avert what could have been, catastrophic, or something even worse than what Rwanda went through. So maybe in the end, justice. He got his he was justified in what he did, or he felt at peace, having done the best that he could. Kofi Annan, dead at the age of 80. And I tell you, he's, any way you look at it, the man did his best. He was a hero, an icon, ambassador of peace. Rest in peace, Kofi Annan.
A story a day.